I was living in Reggio Emilia at that time. I was working nights at the train yard, cleaning the same cars over and over, trying not to think about how much of my life I was wasting. I was renting a room above a bakery that smelled worse than the toilets at the station. I didn't talk to anyone unless I had to. I didn't have time or energy for people. Just needed to stay alive. That was enough. There was a small shop I passed almost every day. The curtains were always closed, and the windows were fogged up even when it wasn't cold. The sign said, Cartomanzia, hand-painted and faded like it had been forgotten on purpose. People whispered about the woman inside, said she could read your future, cleanse your bloodline, remove bad omens. I thought it was a scam like any other. Then I missed my period, twice. I wasn't sleeping, my hands were shaking all the time, and I couldn't eat without feeling sick. I didn't know who to talk to. The man responsible had vanished, and the local clinic wouldn't take me without money. One night when I passed that shop, I stopped. I didn't decide it. My feet did. Something told me to go in. Inside, it smelled like meat that had been left out too long. The room was dim, lit by a single lamp hanging crooked over the table. She didn't say hello, just stared at me like I was already on a list. Her eyes didn't blink once while she shuffled the cards. She told me to sit. I didn't argue. She laid out the cards without hesitation. Her hands were dry and her nails looked like they'd been chewed flat. I didn't know what I was looking at, but her face changed with every card. The third one made her eyebrows twitch. The seventh made her lips part just a little. The 12th made her look up at me, but she didn't say a word. Then she flipped the 14th. It was temperance. A woman pouring water from one cup to another. But she didn't call it that. She stared at it for a long time and whispered, Sacrificio. Her voice changed when she said it. Lower, heavier, like she wasn't talking to me anymore. She told me that fate had wrapped itself around me like wire. That something bad was on its way. She didn't say what. She just said I could feel it already, couldn't I? I didn't respond. She told me there was a way to stop it, a ritual. Said it had to be done at her home, not here. Too much interference in the shop. I asked her what kind of ritual. She didn't answer. Just smiled and said if I wanted to live, I should come on Sunday. I went home that night and didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that card. I didn't even believe in this kind of thing, but something about her voice when she said Sacrificio got stuck in my head like a song. Sunday came, and I packed a change of clothes and took the train to Corriego. I told myself it was just superstition. I just wanted peace of mind, that's all. Her house looked normal from the outside. A little old, maybe. The kind of place you'd expect an old widow to live in. But the second I walked in, I knew something was off. The hallway was too narrow, the curtains too thick. It was like the light didn't want to stay inside. She didn't welcome me, just pointed to the back and told me to follow. Normally I would think that this was a bad idea, but those were other times. I was young and naive. The room she brought me to had no windows, just walls covered in stained fabric and shelves packed with jars filled with things I couldn't identify. Some floated. Some were wrapped in gauze. The table in the middle had straps at each corner. She said it was to keep the spirit in place during the ritual. I asked her what that meant. She told me not to worry, that it was just symbolic. She handed me a robe and told me to undress and change. The fabric was coarse and smelled like old ashes. While I changed, she lit candles around the table and placed bowls filled with herbs and oils at my feet. She poured something into a tin cup and told me to drink it. It was thick, bitter, and burned on the way down. My stomach turned almost immediately. I asked what it was. She didn't answer. She just said it would open my body to the spirit. My hand started shaking. My heart felt like it was skipping beats. I told her I didn't want to do it anymore. She raised one hand slowly, and for a second, I thought she was going to stop. Then she pulled a long knife from under the cloth on the table. It wasn't clean. The blade was blackened near the handle, and the edges were serrated. I stepped back and asked her what she was doing. She said this was the only way, that the balance needed to be restored. Before I could move, she lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than any I'd ever felt. She forced me down onto the table and strapped my left arm. I fought, kicked, scratched, but she didn't flinch. She didn't move like she'd done it before, and fast. She managed to strap down one leg before I kicked her in the ribs with the other. She stumbled back, but didn't fall. Just smiled like it was part of the game. I tore off the strap on my wrist and rolled off the table, knocking over a tray of hot coals she set beside me. The room filled with smoke. I went for the door, but it was locked from the outside. I turned to find her already on her feet, breathing heavily, knife still in her hand. She started chanting something, louder this time, and walked toward me slowly. I grabbed a jar from the shelf and threw it at her face. Glass shattered, and she screamed, but didn't stop moving. Her face was bleeding, but she kept coming. I threw another one and another until she dropped the knife and covered her face. I ran to the far wall and found a heavy lamp. I swung it at her when she got close and hit her shoulder hard enough to crack something. She finally fell, not unconscious, but stunned. I picked up the knife and backed away toward the door. She laughed through the blood. Said I was the only one who made it that far. Said I should be proud. I told her to shut up and slammed the blade into the door frame until it splintered enough for me to force it open. I ran down the hallway, past more rooms, more jars, more things I'll never forget. The smell got worse as I moved through the house. One room was filled with cauldrons and animal bones. Another had dresses hung like trophies. There were stains on the floor I didn't want to look at. I kicked open a door at the end of the hall and found a staircase leading to the cellar. I hesitated, then turned back. I needed to get out, not deeper in. The front door was bolted. I used the knife as a lever and cracked the frame open enough to slide through. My legs were bleeding and my head was pounding, but I ran. I didn't stop until the trees thinned out and I saw a road. A delivery truck came around the bend and I jumped into the street. The driver slammed the brakes and screamed when he saw me. But I didn't explain. I just begged him to drive. He dropped me at a clinic 2 towns over. I told them everything. Every word she said, every room, every jar. They sent police to the house that night. She was still there, calm, sitting in a chair with a cup of tea. Said she'd been expecting them. They found remains. Not one body, several. Some parts in barrels, others in sacks labeled with names. There were handwritten recipes. Soap, tallow, blood cakes. One drawer had teeth. Another had hair. There was a list nailed to the wall. 13 names were crossed out. The 14th was mine. She confessed without hesitation. Explained the rituals. How each one gave strength to the next. She called them offerings. Said the souls had been chosen. She didn't regret anything. When they asked her how many she had planned, she smiled and said she was only getting started. They didn't send her to prison. She was declared insane and locked in a psychiatric ward. But I know what I saw. That woman wasn't insane. She was patient, cold. She didn't believe she was doing something wrong. She believed she was fulfilling a role, like a priest, but without mercy. Reporters came. They wanted interviews. They wanted me in court. I said no. I didn't care about justice. I just wanted to forget. I still had scars on my legs from the glass. I still heard her voice at night. The police offered protection, but I left. Changed my name, moved north. No one knew where. No one followed. That was enough for me. Years later, I saw a book in a library. Her name was on the cover. They'd turned her into a headline, a story, some monster to be dissected and studied. I didn't open it. I already knew the ending. Sometimes I still see that card, Not in dreams, not in hallucinations, just flashes. 14th card, temperance, balance, control. I remember how she looked at it, how she said my name before I told it to her, how she touched the edges like it meant something personal. I wasn't her first. I wasn't even her favorite. I was just the one who got away. The final ingredient that never made it into the bowl. And a part of me wonders if she's still waiting to finish that recipe. This story is based on the crimes of Leonardo Cianciulli, an Italian serial killer active between 1939 and 1940. Deeply superstitious and devoted to ritual practices, Cianciulli used tarot readings as a way to manipulate her victims. She invited them for spiritual consultations where she claimed to see misfortune or death in their cards. Posing as a trusted fortune teller, she convinced each woman that a ritual was necessary to change their fate. Under this pretense, she lured them to her home, drugged them, killed them with an axe, and dismembered their bodies. She boiled their remains in cauldrons, turning body fat into soap and mixing blood into tea cakes she served to others.
My name is Anna Torres. I used to read tarot out of my house. Quiet, simple setup. Small table, dim light, no candles, no fake accents, just the cards and what they said. People came to me with all kinds of requests. Relationships, money, loss, hope. Some left crying, others with a weight lifted. I never pretended I had powers, just patterns in the cards, and a gut feeling from years of watching people lie to themselves. My place wasn't fancy, a ground floor apartment with cracked walls and blinds that barely closed right, but it was home. I saw regulars, people who trusted me, and occasionally, someone new would come in with a strange vibe, usually just awkward or off. I could handle that. Then, one night, this guy, Giuseppe, showed up. He didn't knock like everyone else. He pounded, 3 times in a row. Firm, no hesitation. I opened up and I saw him. Average height, bad posture, eyes darting like they were scanning something behind me. He looked wet, like he'd been standing outside longer than he should have. He said someone told him about me, that I helped people find answers. I let him in. If I hadn't, maybe none of this would have happened. The first session was quiet. He brought a photo of a woman, cold expression, blonde, like a stock photo without the smile. He wanted to know if she still thought about him. I laid out the spread. The answer was clear. No. She had moved on. The cards weren't vague. He sat there for too long after I told him. Just stared at the photo. I offered to reshuffle. He shook his head, paid, and walked out. He came back a few days later. Different photo, different name, same kind of stare. This time, it was a man. Same question. Did he still think about him? I started getting the sense that these weren't just breakups. They were obsessions. But I didn't say anything. Just did the reading and kept it brief. He nodded slowly again, like he was confirming something dark in his head. The third time he didn't bring a photo. Just sat there and asked if I could tell him if someone had cursed him. I told him I didn't do that kind of reading. He insisted. Said strange things were happening. People avoiding him. Doors closing on him. His luck rotting. He blamed the presence. I kept it polite, but firm. Nothing in my readings pointed to that. He left without paying. That's when I should have stopped everything. Should have locked the doors, packed up the cards, and moved on. But I didn't. I kept telling myself it was just another unstable client. Just part of the job. He returned on Tuesday without knocking. Just stood at my window, staring through the gap in the blinds. I almost called the cops right then, but something about him kept me still. When I opened the door a crack, he pushed against it with his hand. "You marked me. You did something. I know you did. His voice wasn't yelling. It was flat, controlled, like he'd been practicing the words in his head over and over. I told him to leave, tried to close the door, but he shoved harder. I slammed the frame on his wrist, and I heard a pop. I locked every bolt and called a friend to stay on the phone until I calmed down. When I looked again, he was gone. That night I stayed awake. Every few minutes I swore I heard something. A plastic rustle outside. A scrape. At 2:14 a.m., I found the kitchen window wide open. I never left it open. On the table, the tarot cards were set out in a spread I hadn't touched. The same spread I'd used on him. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of my room with a knife in my hand, and every light on. Nothing happened. But I kept feeling like something was just out of view. Not watching. Waiting. For 3 days I didn't leave the apartment. Didn't eat much. I moved the dresser in front of the front door and tapped the kitchen knife behind the toilet. It wasn't paranoia. I knew he'd be back. I just didn't know when or how. Then came the smell. Not rot. Not garbage. Something deeper. Like something sweet left in a sealed box for months. It came from the hallway, then the kitchen, then my own bedroom. I cleaned everything. I bleached. Nothing helped. It would vanish for hours, then come back heavier. The second night, I heard the sound again. Metal scraping against the concrete. Not loud, just consistent. Like someone dragging something behind them. When I looked through the peephole, I saw nothing. But my mailbox was hanging open. Inside it, a clump of human hair, tied with a rubber band. That was the first time I cried, not out of sadness, but out of panic. I couldn't breathe properly. I texted a friend to call the cops, but I couldn't explain what they'd find. I kept thinking, how did he get the cards right? How did he get in? And then I realized, maybe I'd opened something when I read for him. Something I didn't understand. The night it happened, it was almost silent. No wind, no traffic, just a cold static in the air. My clock ticked loud, like a metronome counting down. I was in the couch, knife in hand, breathing shallow. He kicked the door, hard, over and over. But a second later, the door gave in. He broke the lock. Wood splinters flew into the room. He stepped inside with a crowbar in one hand and something wrapped in cloth in the other. You can't hide anymore. You put it inside me. You opened something, and now we both pay. He rushed me. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it until I dropped the blade. I stumbled back and reached for a lamp. Threw it at him. It shattered. He grunted and bolted through the back door. Didn't look back, just ran. He was behind me, limping but steady. I reached the plaza, a wide open space. People were there. I ran towards them screaming. At first they looked at me confused, until they saw him. He was dragging the crowbar behind him, blood on his shirt, wild-eyed. One tackled Giuseppe into the ground, another kicked the weapon away. He screamed and trashed. Curse her! She opened it! She's the witch! She brought it in! His eyes weren't just angry, they were gone, like something else was driving him. He kept shouting nonsense while they held him down. I collapsed onto the ground. I didn't feel safe until I saw him in handcuffs. They took him away that night. He's still locked up. Claimed insanity. Said I cursed him. Said I summoned something into his life. Said he had to stop me before it spread. Psychologists called it paranoid delusion. I don't care what they call it. He believed it, and that was enough. I moved, changed my number. I threw the tarot deck in the garbage, and I hadn't touched a single card since. I sleep with lights on now. I don't read people. I don't let strangers near me. But some nights, just when I start to drift off, I smell the same sweetness in the air, and I wonder if it really was delusion, Or if something did come through during that final reading, something that didn't leave with him, something still looking at me, waiting for the next door to open. This story is based on the crimes of Giuseppe Canzani, who murdered Anna Torres on May 4th, 2022, in Queens, New York. Unlike the events in the story, the real Anna Torres did not survive her encounter with the killer. Canzani shot her at point-blank range in the doorway of her own home. Canzani told investigators that he believed Torres had placed a curse on him during a series of tarot readings she had conducted. He claimed she used witchcraft to ruin his life, and that he had to stop her. The investigation revealed no evidence of any curse, only that Torres had worked as a tarot reader in her neighborhood. She was 51 years old, and well known in her community for her spiritual work.
I used to read tarot cards in Medellin, in a cramped room at the back of an old building. It wasn't fancy, but people came. Desperate people. They didn't want the truth. They wanted to hear that their lives weren't spiraling. I gave them what they needed, collected the money, and moved on. I didn't believe in the cards. I believed in survival. It was a Thursday night, late. I was packing up when someone knocked. 3 men stood at the door. 2 stayed back. The third stepped forward and asked for a reading. He looked clean-cut, polite, like a lawyer or something corporate. I told him I was closed. He handed me a thick stack of cash, more than enough for 3 readings. I let him in. He sat down, said his name was Victor, and didn't ask a question. Just said, "Show me everything." He kept his hands on the table, palms flat, like he was trying to keep something in place. I shuffled slowly. The way he watched me, I felt like I was the one being read. The first card I pulled was the Tower, then the Ten of Swords, then Death. Not unusual to gather, but something about the way they landed made my chest tighten. I tried to brush it off, make up some vague interpretation about rebirth and endings. He didn't say a word, just stared at me like he already knew what I was going to say. I finished the reading, packed up quickly and stood up, hoping he'd get the hint. He didn't move right away. He stared at the table for a few more seconds, then nodded slowly and got up. The 2 men outside were still there. One leaned against the hallway wall. The other stood in the stairwell. None of them said anything. They all left at once. I locked the door and turned off the lights. Something about them felt wrong. Too quiet. Too calm. That night I barely slept. I kept hearing creaks in the hallway outside my apartment. I checked the peephole 4 times, but saw nothing. At around 3:30 a.m., I heard someone walk past my door and stop. I waited. A minute later, I heard 3 soft knocks, not on my door, on the wall right beside it. I didn't move. I sat in the dark, breathing through my nose, not even blinking. I didn't check. I didn't open the door. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I closed the shop. No clients, no calls. I told myself I'd imagined it all. But paranoia's a tricky thing. You don't know when it's real. But that afternoon, I saw one of them across the street from the supermarket. He wasn't looking at me, just standing there like he was waiting for something. I turned around and left without buying anything. My stomach felt like it was full of needles. That night, I stayed inside with the lights off. At 11:22 p.m., I peeked through the blinds. One of them was standing under the streetlight across from my building. He wasn't doing anything, just watching. I stood there for 15 minutes, not moving, not blinking. He didn't leave until after midnight. The following day, I left the house early, took back streets, avoided familiar corners. It didn't matter. I spotted the second man again. Same torn jacket, same blank stare. He was sitting on a bench 2 blocks from my place. I walked past without looking, heart pounding, eyes forward. That night, I didn't sleep at home. I stayed at a friend's place and made up a lie about construction noise in my building. At 2:13 a.m., there were 3 knocks on her door. Slow, heavy. No one was outside when she checked the peephole. I didn't tell her anything. We just sat on the couch staring at the floor. 2 days later, I had to go back. My stuff, my ID, my money was still all there. I waited until evening, hoping the streets would be quiet. I didn't take the usual path. I cut through alleys, took a cab halfway, walked the rest. I checked every corner, every reflection. No one was behind me. I got within a block of my building. Then I saw him. One of them, just standing under a broken streetlight. I turned around and the second guy was behind me. No words, no weapons, just presence. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I turned into a side street and walked fast. My hands were shaking. They didn't follow, not right away. But the moment I stepped into the alley that leads to my building's back entrance, I heard footsteps, fast, direct. I broke into a run. The ground was wet, and I slipped hard. My elbow slammed against the pavement. I got up, ignored the pain, and kept running. Halfway through the alley, Victor stepped out from behind a dumpster. He didn't charge. He didn't yell. He just walked straight at me and grabbed me by the arm. I punched him in the side, but it didn't faze him. He slammed me into the wall and held me there like I was nothing, like I weighed nothing. He whispered into my ear. His breath was cold against my neck.
I didn't like those cards.
I told him the reading meant nothing. I lied. I said I made it all up. He didn't believe me. He looked at me straight in the eyes and smiled, not with kindness, but with confidence, with finality. The other 2 grabbed me and dragged me down the alley. I fought, kicked, bit. One of them punched me in the ribs, hard. I couldn't breathe for a second. They opened a metal door and pulled me inside. The place was unfinished. No electricity, half-built walls, concrete dust everywhere. It smelled like mold and rust. They forced me upstairs into an open room with no windows. Victor pulled out a deck. My deck. The same cards I used 2 nights before. They made me sit, told me to shuffle. I refused. Victor slapped me across the face, hard. My ears rang. I shuffled. My hands were trembling. He laid out the cards one by one in complete silence. He didn't look at them. He looked at me. The other 2 began repeating phrases I didn't understand. Names, words in a language that didn't sound local. Then they started to chant. Victor lit a candle and placed it right between us. I realized then, they weren't doing this for me. They were using me. The cards weren't about fate. They were a map, and I'd pulled something they didn't like, something they needed to fix. Victor asked what I remembered from the reading. I said I didn't remember anything. He held the candle under my chin.
We need the 6th card. Tell me what it was.
I said I never pulled the 6th card. He didn't move the flame. I could feel the heat against my throat. One of the others picked up the deck, shuffled and slammed it down in front of me. I had to pull it. Before they could say anything else, I grabbed the candle and threw it at Victor's face. He staggered back. I lunged for the deck and tossed it across the room. Cards flew everywhere. The other 2 ran towards me, but I ducked and crawled under a broken beam. One of them grabbed my ankle. I turned and kicked him in the face with both legs. He let go. I scrambled to the stairs. Victor got up and grabbed a piece of metal from the floor. I did not wait to see what he would do with it. I jumped the last few stairs and slammed the front door open. I ran until I couldn't breathe. The woman inside screamed, and she called the police. The cops came. I told them everything. They checked the building. Empty. No sign of anyone. No blood. No candle. No deck. Nothing. The place had been abandoned for weeks, they said. I left the city 3 days later. Moved to another town. Changed my number. Stopped reading cards. I deleted every photo I had of my old setup. I thought it was over. Last week I found something in my mailbox. A single tarot card in a blank envelope. The Tower. The exact same card that started it all. This story is based on the crimes of Luis Marina Montoya Trujillo and Gloria Amparo Tabon, 2 women who were murdered in Medellin, Colombia, in 2012. Both victims were known for practicing tarot readings and were killed in separate but closely timed attacks. Luis Marina and Gloria were shot inside their home by 2 unknown assailants. The murders occurred just days apart, and although they happened in different parts of the city, the circumstances suggested a disturbing pattern. The woman had known no threats against them, and the motives behind the attacks were never clearly established by authorities. What made the cases especially unsettling was the specific targeting of women involved in tarot and spiritual practices, suggesting the possibility of a planned sequence of killings. To this day, the murders remain unsolved.